Hi there, I'm Alex Dorr, Vice President at Reality-Based Leadership, and the tool I want to talk to you about today is the Accounting For tool. Now, accountability is the most talked about but least understood concept in leadership today. And accountability is something that all leaders seek in their teams and they say that they want, but they aren't always sure how to cultivate that mindset and sustain it long term. And the Accounting For tool is a brilliant way to do that as part of your leadership philosophy. And so most debriefs, which really is where the Accounting For tool comes in, turns into a big venting session about how other people failed us. And we make a list of all the things that went wrong and who didn't step up and what circumstances came up. And that justifies why we fell short of our goal or we didn't deliver on what we promised. And this is all too common in most leadership meetings today. And so the Accounting For tool gives you a simple way to call a timeout when you're noticing this type of behavior in your team, return us to center and say, what we're gonna do is we're gonna account for our part in this situation and think about how we can make it better in the future. It's really that simple. If you break up the word accountability, it's the ability to account for our part in something, and the ability to take action after is our response ability. And so the idea here is if you can't account for something that went wrong, you can't change it. But also, more importantly, and not used enough with this tool, is if you can't account for how something's working well and why you're getting success, then you can't replicate it or teach it or knowledge share it or bring others along to do the same either. So the Accounting For tool is often used when we fall short as a debrief for ownership and accountability, but it's also a magical tool to use if you want to replicate a best practice or a team that has had a breakthrough and be able to transfer that knowledge to others. So let's look at the tool. You want to bring out the Accounting For tool PDF that has the step-by-step on how to facilitate the activity, and then also the questions that are also there will help you guide that discussion. And in the simplest form, the Accounting For tool involves just calling a timeout and really calling the team to greatness that I've noticed we're blaming other people and circumstances. What I want to do now is account for our part in the situation. So with it here in front of me, the first step is we really look at being clear about our results. And the key here is we don't put an asterisk next to it, or we don't give bonus points for circumstances. I'll give an example here shortly, but many times you hear, well, we did pretty good considering the circumstances, or considering X, Y, and Z was also going on, we actually did all right when our promise was to deliver X or deliver by the deadline. And so people are trying to lower the bar there. And that's usually what happens with this tool. And so we want to get very clear on what our results were so we can start from the truth and reality. And we'll talk about that in the example. Have everyone be incredibly honest, including you as a leader, about where we landed in our results and remove those asterisks. Now, step 3 here is lead the team through discussion. You'll notice that many people will say, well, other people didn't deliver, or marketing forgot to, or operations had no idea about, and they focus on they and them. We want to call a timeout there and have everyone begin their sharing after some reflection with I. High accountables say I 7 times more often. So each of us takes a pause, and before we share, as we go, we start with I chose, I assumed, I denied, I didn't follow up with, and that's returning us to be able to see our part in the situation, even if much of it was outside of our scope of control, as they say. Then after each team member is able to account for their contribution in the situation, no matter how small, have each person commit to 1, 2, or 3 things they can do differently. And that commitment becomes their action plan moving forward, and you can follow up on that. Now, these commitments often involve a little bit of reflection on where do you need to evolve in your skill set, your approach, your willingness. And this final commitment is so important. If you're in the exit row in an airplane and they ask you, are you willing and able to open this door if if the plane goes down, and you're kind of asleep and you go, they're like, no, I need a verbal yes with some eye contact. You're something like 200 times more likely to open that door based on the research if you give a verbal yes with a commitment. So just like all of our tools, if it doesn't end with who doing what by when, it's like it never happened, and the Accounting For tool is the same. And so I want to give you an example of how this tool was used to a high level of success from a reality-based leadership client that we were supporting. So there was a group in HR that they were looking at making a little bit of extra money at a time in their business when it was experiencing some difficulties. And there was a situation in Williston, North Dakota, where the oil fields were really booming and there was a ton of work needed up there. And so if you could recruit some engineers, you could, whatever you promised, if you got those engineers, you got paid a bonus. Let's say it's $1,000 or something like that. The group came back and said, here's what we can commit to in a 4-month time period. We can get 12 engineers. And the challenge was, if you didn't get what you committed to, you actually would lose 1,000. So it's like gain 1,000 if you get it, but you lose 1,000 for each one you fell short of. So there's a little bit of consequence there. So the group did their analysis, said we can get 12, and that started the project. They briefed on a little bit of strategy, the team worked together, and everybody went on their way and got busy with things. About 3 months into this experience, the leader came in, kind of the project manager, and said, team, how's it going on the engineer recruiting project? And most of the group said things like, pretty good. Things are looking great. We have a lot of good movement going on. And so that all sounded great. And she said, well, what's the number? Well, we have 9 people interested. It's like, that's great. We have 9 of 12 with 1 month left. We're right on track. But then the leader noticed they said interested. And this is where the accounting for tool starts to come in and get right to what is the truth. How truly are our results going? What do you mean by interested? Well, the group goes, we have a lot of people that have looked at the landing page. We have a lot of people that said, this sounds pretty cool. I'll check it out. But then they had to get to the facts. Step 1, which is be clear about our results. How are we doing? So it sounds like we have 0 signed up engineers to go to these oil fields. It's at 0. So the leader asked kind of jokingly, so how'd you get pretty good or we're on track with 0 out of 12 signed? And this happens a lot with the accounting for tool if we can't get that first step, which is being honest about our results. So the leader noticed this was a perfect time to account for our results and brought out the tool. And she just went on to the next step. Everybody share, what's your part in this? Like, what's going on here? Why are we at 0 with only 1 month to go? And the first person raises their hand and says, well, this is really all marketing's fault. We met with them and gave them everything they needed for their landing page and they seemed clear. And then when we had our first social, the link was broken and they never really took accountability and they've been behind on the project and haven't been focused on it. So it's really all marketing's fault. That was the first person. Now the second person goes, this is actually all senior leaders' fault. We sent them some speaking points and how to sell this position. And when we put a social together, they just talked about weather, sports, and a bunch of random things and didn't really know how to sell the position. And so they kind of failed us. In fact, I thought they got paid the big bucks. And obviously that's not enough, to believe that they're not socially awkward or something. So it was now down to marketing's fault and senior leaders' fault. The last person said, do you understand the weather? In Williston, North Dakota, you basically have to walk backwards with your hood up because it's like -40 and the wind's blowing like crazy. And so it was dawning on the team and the leader was the odds of us actually achieving our goal, which is catching this up and hitting the deadline in a month, was dependent on whether we got a completely different marketing team with more skill sets, more capabilities, a completely different group of senior leaders, and the weather in Williston, North Dakota changed overnight. So the group is really blaming other people and their circumstances. So they called a timeout and said, team, I want to validate this experience. I appreciate you sharing, but we are off track here. Let's call you to greatness. Everyone take a moment to reflect, and I want you to be thinking about starting every sentence with I. I chose, I assume, I denied, I didn't, I did. And when everybody started sharing, things were profound. The first person raised their hand that had mentioned marketing and said, you know what, as I look inside and as I get accountable, I chose to not follow up when it looked like marketing didn't quite understand what I need them to do. I didn't really manage the project and set up a project plan, and I just didn't follow up when I felt a little uncomfortable. I didn't test the link before we had that big event. I just trusted them and just used hope as my strategy. And then I didn't follow up and really talk to the team about what that did for the rest of the project. I just sat back and waited. And then the person went right into, and what I commit to doing next time is actually setting up a project plan, and I will check in more with marketing to make sure they are clear with commitments on what to do. This was beautiful. The second person said, I have reflected and I did set up a little meeting with senior leaders, but didn't really say, here's the ask. And we didn't do any role playing and really practice selling the position. And I just assumed, as I said, that they made the big bucks and this would just be easy for them. And because they're paying so much money up there, people would just say yes. And so I am going to set up more role playing events and actually work with willing senior leaders and not just throw everyone in there. This is beautiful. Ending with commitments. We can follow up on this. This is amazing. And the last person just kind of smiled about the weather and said, I'm sorry. But the idea here is now that this group sees their part in it and what they fell short on, even though others fell short as well, but they see their part, they can see what they can do to change it. And after these commitments, it was fascinating. The group didn't get to 12, unfortunately, but they got 10 of those engineers in a month. And they really learned a lot about themselves, about how the ego can play us when it wants to be the victim, and how accountability can get us back on track, and accounting for our part in the mess allows us to have a chance at cleaning it up in the future. And so the accounting for tool doesn't have to be a big intervention, but what is cool is it's really a gentle checkmate of the ego, because that tool and the questions you have in the PDF give it nowhere to hide. And we're just asking questions, and we're just calling the group to watch for, in our human condition where we tend to blame other people and circumstances, just call it timeout and say your human condition's coming out. Let's get back to I chose, I assumed. And this safe space to land, to debrief more consistently, raises accountability in your team, raises the likelihood of results. And then lastly, as I said in the introduction, if you use this tool after a team is getting results, you're able to replicate success, teach it to others. And I'll never forget, I was working with a retail group and I was at their event. And after the event, I just heard one of the highest leaders say, okay, I don't know what's happening this year, but in Q1, we are actually on track. It's usually a slow quarter, but somehow things are going amazing. And I just don't want to touch it. I just don't want to jinx it, so to speak. And what that also showed is great, the success is amazing, but there's an opportunity to account for with the team, what are we doing that's leading to success? What scripts are we following? What processes are we following? How are we using the system? What is the method to our madness that's getting these results, or is it just a fluke? But let's investigate that, because if that's working now, maybe it'll work in the future, and whoever we hire as we grow can follow the same breakthrough. So use the accounting for tool as a way to get out beyond the ego. Everyone has the paper in front of them. We are using the tool to keep us anchored in the conversation and in accountability. And so account for our part in it so we can account for how we can change it for the better in the future. Good luck, enjoy the tool.